Noticing Subaru's gaze, Amelia aimed her amethyst eyes towards him and raised her hand. The reason why Amelia was lying in ambush like that upon the roof, was so that she could move instantly in case an issue of some sort rose. Though Subaru would have liked her to quietly stay within the dragon carriage, but with the support of Julia's spirit arts gone, the only ally capable of long-range attacks was Amelia. Though it wasn't as if Beatrice could not do it if she pushed herself, but with a single large blow, Subaru would exhaust his gas. It was a part of Subaru's inferiority complex that, in terms of strength, he had to depend upon others, for protecting him as well, if he was present. If that wasn't so, if he did not have to do that, perhaps even Ramwu. The weakness of thinking in that direction, was always present within Subaru. Subaru, HK. With the rise of such uncompromising emotions beyond his control, the back of Beatrice's head pushed up his jaw. At Subaru's surprise, Beatrice snorted her nose. Focus on what is in front of you right now, is what she must have had meant. Looking overhead once again, Amelia, too, had pointed her finger towards Subaru, and he understood that she was urging for similar caution. Unable to express either compromise or understanding, he exchanged a deep sigh. The truth was that he wanted to slap his cheek and alter his emotions, but that could put his life at risk, an action that could prove to be deadly. And, as Subaru's usual detour of thoughts gave rise to his resolution, the party's forefront arrived at the flower meadow practically at the same time. Meili, move. At once, Jun halted, pulling the dragon carriage, and Meili's faint voice slipped into the creaking sound of the wheels and was thrown towards the flower meadow. At first, there being no response to Meili's call, Subaru gritted his molars. Meili, move. Once again, Meili called out the order. Even still, indeed, no change was born in the flower meadow. In the vexing duration, Subaru's stomach lining started to grumble with something similar to itchiness. And, with that distortion, the ground, as if truly being stripped off, the flower meadow arose. Without thinking, looking straight at the form of the witch beast, Subaru's throat seized up. The witch beast, called the courtesan bear, befitting of its name, possessed a figure like that of a bear. The height of the courtesan bear was perhaps around 2 meters to 3 meters. Short legs, in exchange for that, arms long enough to drag on the ground. Its arms visibly concealed under black fur, and claw-like nails growing at the ends, is what he understood. From the rear to the armpits of that body, the vivid flowers swaying was the sort of impression it projected. But, observing that witch beast from close proximity, one's eyes tended to turn towards the front rather than the rear of that body. Though its physique was concealed by black fur, creeping about that body was not body hair. Closely packed, wrapping the body were the finely jumbled together roots of the flowers. They appeared as if blood vessels that were floating on the skin. The minute roots were covering the body of the witch beast. Subaru, HK. On the body covered with closely packed roots, the parts which the roots did not reach were abnormally parched, and both the flesh and skin had withered. Its facial features, its cranium had reached the limit of dehydration to the point where it was visibly obvious, and its circular protuberant eyeballs were bloodshot, wielding hatred for everything in this world. That seemed to be, as if it was slurping the life of the flowers whose roots it had pasted upon its own body. The courtesan bears could not coexist with the flowers. Clearly, they had taken away the lives of the flowers. The witch beast, which gave off an unbearable feeling of revulsion by merely looking at it, followed Meili's words with sluggish movement. Slowly pulling out its body from the ground, as the roots got uprooted from the desert from which nothing could be absorbed, 1,000 sounds of snapping limitlessly chained. For opening up space just so that the dragon carriage could pass, the moving courtesan bears reached 100 in count. And as if knowing no end, their numbers continued to increase. Julius, Hugh. Faintly, Julius' sigh was audible, as the dragon carriage resumed proceeding. Julius, in that state, with his body hair standing up due to the spectacle in front of his sight, must have failed to put up with it. Attached to the rear of the dragon carriage, Subaru and the others as well entered the path bloomed open by the courtesan bears. Subaru, ugh. At exactly that instant, when Subaru's sense of smell crossed the threshold of the courtesan bear's turf, a violent aroma of flowers could be felt. It seemed to be different from the stench of the time of confronting the sand earthworm, with respective difference in quality from that. The sweet scent jumbled together in the situation did not mean that the sense of violence had changed. Their nostrils were invaded, their intracerebral gears simply acquired the hallucination of the sweet scent. Developing serious dizziness, the repulsive stench awakened a headache. Something so exasperating, that he would not mind the sand gusts at all compared to this. This toxic aroma coiling up within his whole body must be driven away, is what he thought with utter seriousness. Such wishes of Subaru were fruitless, and in the absence of any flow of wind, the party proceeded towards the interior of the flower meadow. Subaru, HK. As if having noticed something, Beatrice pulled Subaru's sleeve. Looking at her wondering what had come up, she was incessantly concerned regarding something behind them. Turning around at that gesture whilst keeping that repulsive premonition in mind, the meaning of Beatrice's reaction could be understood. The space in the flowers that opened up in accordance with Meili's instructions, looking at the passage of the dragon carriage and Patrusk, from the close proximity to that till the very end, the scenery was steadily returning to how it originally was. Meili's orders came true, and the dragon carriage being able to pass at this particular point in time according to the instructions had been achieved. Returning to their original positions, and entering into the state of lying dormant, could that be their plans? Even if they did not intend to return, they were still unable to stop midway. Of course, taking a break in the midst of this nest of these witch beasts, such jokes needed to be refrained from as well. Subaru. The moment immediately after he'd thought that, the dragon carriage's advance came to a pause. Looking at the front wondering what had happened, the reason behind the dragon carriage's halt was explicit. A lone courtesan bear, in front of the dragon carriage, got up and stood still, and turned those hollow eyes towards the two drivers with that one alone making suspicious movements. The movements of the courtesan bears in the vicinity too, started to change. The feet of the courtesan bears, who had, till now, stolidly and obediently made way, stopped, and as if tracing the actions of the one staring at the dragon carriage, their gazes accumulated on the dragon carriage. This is bad, was the intuitive realization Subaru had. Looking back, they had already covered several hundreds of meters since entering the flower meadow. With the pathway behind plugged up, it was clear that they had been surrounded by the courtesan bears from all directions. Their numbers were in the hundreds, or possibly even in the thousands. A violent difference in numbers. Thinking that far, his gaze entwined with that of Amelia's, who was on top of the roof. Amelia was looking down onto the courtesan bear in front, and was puzzled over what kind of judgment she should deal it. If the outbreak of a fight, just as till now, could be avoided, then clearing the front ward of the dragon carriage with Amelia's magic, and running through was the optimal way. However, she did not want to mistake the timing and rush things too fast. Meili, SHH, and in front of Subaru and the rest who were puzzled regarding their judgment, the one with utmost composure was Meili. Putting a finger on her lips, she calmed the indecisive Subaru and the others beforehand. Following afterwards, she pointed the finger she had on her lips towards the front, and scowled at the courtesan bear looking at her. Meili, tch. A finger pointing outwards, and a sound, as if flicking her tongue, leaked out of Meili's lips. That was a sigh, like what humans made to soothe kittens. If the subject truly was a kitten, then it would give a pleasant impression as well, but with the fiendish witch beast as the subject, there was no mitigation whatsoever. However, all of Meili's fingers jolted at her tongue's sound, and gradually, the courtesan bear's line of sight shifted, from the two drivers, to Meili alone, and then moved to Meili's fingers. Meili, tch. At the same pace, obtaining certainty that the courtesan bear's focus was on the finger, Meili slowly swung her hand, which had her fingers pointed towards the right of the dragon carriage. Lured to the movement of that arm, the courtesan bear, which had brought the dragon carriage to a standstill, turned its face towards that and moved, taking a single step in that direction. Subaru, At the courtesan bear's conduct, of distancing itself away from the dragon carriage, a reflexive sigh of relief leaked out of Subaru's throat. Amelia or Beatrice too, who had stiffened their bodies up, too, loosened their shoulders in relief. When the one who had caused a standstill moved, the other courtesan bears too, tried to return to their own movements of distancing themselves. At the same pace, the march through the flower meadow resumed was how it was supposed to be. HK. At that moment, the thread of tension snapped, and nobody could be condemned for raising their voice. Suddenly, in the situation of enduring under compulsion of utmost limits of the stalemate, the thing known as the heart could not stand strong. That goes for humans, and for ground dragons as well. Showered upon with the pressure of losing to the courtesan bear, Jun gave out a short growl, and stamped its feet on the ground, as if enraged. Subaru, OSHHK. At Jun's roar, which abruptly cut off the silence, the courtesan bears, which were in a state of lying dormant, reacted all together at once. The one attempting to distance itself away from the dragon carriage turned back, and that reaction infected the environs as well. The witch beasts rose, and leapt upon the dragon carriage with their bare fangs. Immediately before Amelia, El Huma. The mana materialized rapidly, and the spearhead of the formed ice lance penetrated through the witch beast's cranium. The sharp vanguard of ice pierced through its large mouth, infringing upon its oral cavity and broke through its nape. Its brain churned, the courtesan bear, without raising its voice, collapsed backwards as it faced annihilation. Caught up in that vigor, several courtesan bears, without pause, toppled sideways. Subaru, run! Shouted Subaru, instantaneously after witnessing the attack by Amelia, who was on top of the dragon carriage. Concording to that call, Julius operated the reins and the dragon carriage started running fiercely at once. Of course, Petrusk, too, followed that, jumping away from the side of the witch beasts standing stock still, and broke off in a savage sprint. Subaru, they recoming ing. Delayed by a single beat, the cutthroat, fierce voice tore apart the night of the Ogria sand dunes. The vast flower meadow was shredded apart at once, with fangs and unsightly appearances naked. The flock sloth of courtesan bears advanced on, aiming for the dragon carriage, fiercely plunging its way through. Beatrice, Subaru. Firmly grip on or you will get thrown off. In fact, the hallucination bathing in strength, was the pressure of the thirst for blood and appetite of the innumerable courtesan bears. With thick arms endowed with claws turned overhead, their merciless attack struck Subaru as well, who was riding the dragon. A direct hit and his body would get torn off easily, with strength that could assuredly force his internal organs to protrude outwards. However, just when it was on the brink of striking, a bluish-white glimmer cut in between, and pierced through the witch beasts. Amelia, hi. Yeah. Alright you. These, Huma. As always, with the mana forming a whirlpool and her voice coming from her heart, giving the impression that the bluish-white light was performing a boisterous dance in the dark sky. That was the transformation of countless sharp spearheads pointing above the ground into blades of ice. That was, immediately after the stagnation of a single moment, firing as if having acquired the propulsive force, tearing the craniums, the arms, the torsos, the legs of the courtesan bears swarming upon the dragon carriage into shreds, giving rise to spouts of blood. Subaru, As expected of Amelia Tan. I've fallen for you again. Amelia, this is not the time for saying such things, is it? Run. Subaru, yes. Having his life saved by Amelia's follow-up, Subaru further accelerated Petrusk. And with the sudden exchange, Amelia was coping with the fight with such composure that it was surprising. In retrospect, even if Amelia had shirked from fighting, it was not as if fighting intimidated her. The tendency to avoid fighting within her was, the indecision that had been erased once that battle had broken out. Ram, Barasu, run till you die. If you do not wish to die. Subaru, yeah, of course Ram. The tough fight being put up by Amelia, the bluish-white light mowed down the front ward of the dragon carriage altogether, and the group of courtesan bears, who had taken a roundabout path, were frozen all at once. Within Jun's rush and breaking through the ice sculpture, sitting on the driver's seat gripping to the reins, was suddenly now Ram, having moved from the passenger compartment. At Ram, who was skillfully handling the reins, driving the earth dragon which was in an agitated state, Subaru peeled open his eyes and let his gaze wander around. Subaru, what about Julius? Ram, even if there are no means for a long-range attack, it seemed it would be unhelpful if he were to be the driver. That's why. At a glance, Ram looked towards the rear at Subaru's call. Lured to that line of sight and looking backwards, Subaru thoughtlessly felt dumbfounded. Biting the sand, beside the dragon carriage with its wheels roaring, clinging onto one of those ornaments, waving about the grasped knight sword, was the form of Julius, clearing away the approaching witch beasts. Julius, burdening Amelia Sama with responsibilities and such, cannot be done either, you see. Subaru, was that directed at me? Julius, that would be putting a halt to his words there. Julius had his knight sword meet with the claws of the approaching witch beasts. The decapitating slash weaved through the gap of those claws, and deeply gorged into the arms of the courtesan bears. At the same pace, the dancing tip of the sword pierced through the throats of the witch beasts, who let out screams, and as if a flash, it granted death by destroying their brainstem. That dance, with minimal destruction, was truly debonair. Julius, wrong. Successively crushing the witch beasts, Julius voiced what remained of his reply to Subaru while dusting away his sword. Subaru made a bitter face at that gesture, tasting reassurance and a sense of defeat. Simply, having put Amelia in charge of the long range, clearing away the close range was down to Julius. If that structure were to continue, the concern regarding the dragon carriage could be saved for later. Rather, the problem was, instead of other affairs, but in this course. Subaru, Biko, can you go for it? Beatrice, Subaru too, be careful that you don't run out of gas, I suppose. Above Petrusk, raising his body, Subaru held the reins with one hand, and the armed Beatrice with the other, and made her small body stand on top of the dragon. And steadily clasping each other's hands, something throbbed in the interior of Subaru's guts. That something, as if seeming sediment, wielded heat and slowly streamed from Subaru's body into Beatrice's. Beatrice, Minya. The crystals of violet materialized with the chant, and aimed for the witch beasts blocking the path ahead of the ground dragon's nose. Accurate aiming, momentary advancement, the outcome visible immediately afterwards. Raising a sound as that of shattering glass, the magical attack directly struck the witch beasts, and the crystals fragmented. However, the following moment, the bodies of the witch beasts fragmented similarly as well. Subaru, alright, good going, Biko. Beatrice, but, reckless firing cannot be done, in fact. Cautiously saving. Minya. Subaru, what about the cautiously saving? Beatrice's battle strength depended upon the mana left within Subaru. In order to oppose the overwhelmingly advancing threat, even Beatrice was unable to compromise much. Tasting the seeming sense of loss, as if his soul was being curtailed with every single attack of magic, Subaru, talkative and composed, abetted Beatrice's nervousness. Of course, such consideration was clearly visible to Beatrice. Melee, enough. Why did it turn out like TS? This could have been taken away. And, the one who had been keeping their silence till now, the final ordnance stood up and trod. A driver, having